And we are now live. Good afternoon and good morning and welcome to season 2 of Clear Conversations. My name is Geraint Jones and I'm Clear M&C Saatchi's Global Marketing Director. Today's conversation focuses on food, drink and consumer goods, discussing 3 clear strategies for growth in 2021, and is presented in partnership with TML Partners. It's great to see some old friends and new joining us from brands like Anheuser-Busch, PepsiCo, cereal partners, Nestle, HelloFresh, Kellogg's, PZ Cussons, GSK, in fact, over 200 brands from around the world. So welcome along. We're also streaming this session live on LinkedIn, so a warm welcome to our audience there too. As an attendee, your camera and microphone are automatically switched off, so you can sit back, relax, don't worry about accidentally spilling your tea all over yourself. It's absolutely fine. The session's being recorded and we'll be sharing it with attendees and those who couldn't make it in the next couple of weeks. So therefore watch out for an email from my colleagues Saskia or Gary in your inbox, probably early next week. It's the first conversation in our second season. Over 2,500 marketers attended or watched last season on repeat. And I'm delighted to say that later this month, you'll be able to listen back to the edited highlights of the whole of season 1 in our new podcast series. For more content, events, and to watch recordings of this and other conversations, visit clearstrategy.com or follow us at Clear M&C Saatchi on LinkedIn for more updates. Should you wish to ask a question during the conversation, please use the Q&A function in the bar at the bottom of your screen and start your question with the name of the panelist that you'd like to answer. For example, type Anna and then your question to ask Anna a question. Right, on that basis, on with the show. Clear is the strategy consulting arm of M&C Saatchi, and we found ourselves in the thick of helping brands to manage the chaos that 2020 has brought with it. From future scenario planning to rapid, agile innovation, category strategy to portfolio management, brand repositioning to proposition development, we've been asked to help brands in a number of sectors to navigate a path through the choppy waters of marketing strategy in 2020. Today's session, and indeed the whole of season 2, focuses on what happens beyond the crisis. It's not going to be straightforward or simple, and there's more chaos to come. But our firm belief at Clear is that even amongst all of this chaos, the opportunity to change for good has never been greater. Today, our head of offer, Mark Killey, will share some perspectives on what food, drink, and consumer goods brands need to be thinking about for 2021, before we debate some of the questions raised with our brilliant panel. I'm delighted to welcome Michael Benson, the Marketing Director for UK for Church & Dwight Co. Hi, Michael.
Hi there.
Michael works for a $4 billion company and one of the fastest growing firms in the consumer packaged goods industry. He joined Church & Dwight 6 years ago, having worked as a director on both the client and agency side across a wide variety of global consumer brands and services. We're also joined by Steve Monk, Business Unit and Marketing Director at Pladis Global. Hi, Steve. Steve developed his marketing career in Philip Morris, Bulmers, Unilever and Cadbury in the UK. Then in 2007, he joined Pernod Ricard's global marketing team for Scotch whiskies, progressing to marketing director for Pernod Ricard Vietnam and Pernod Ricard Gulf. He returned to the UK in 2016 as business unit director for the 260 million savoury and healthier portfolio at United Biscuits, and currently advises private equity in the food and drinks categories. We're also joined by Valerie Brightholly, who leads consumer excellence product development at Mondelez International. Hi, Valerie. Good to see you. Valerie has experience across several FMCG categories, working on alcoholic beverages at Brown-Forman, grocery at Conagra, confections at WM Wrigley, specialty products at Clorox, and now snacks, which I think is probably the best part, at Mondelez International. Valerie's career has been rooted in product development, working to understand the nuances of the complete user experience to guide product and package design. And I think she's going to be bringing a brilliant and slightly different take on the questions that we'll be asking today. And finally, I'm delighted to be joined by Anna Sanchez. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
Anna's VP Consumer Division EMEA at McCormick. She's been with McCormick for 2 years and leads the consumer division for EMEA with overall P&L ownership across all the markets. Prior to this role, she was the VP of Marketing, driving an overall transformation across all aspects, including innovation, data and analytics, technology, digital and communication. She joined McCormick from Colgate-Palmolive, try saying that quickly, where she spent 15 years in leadership roles in the US, Latin American and European divisions. And before we kick off any further, I should also introduce my colleague, Mark Killey. Mark is our head of offer and is currently our UK MD. He specialises in strategy and innovation, and after over a decade at Clear, he's worked on a really wide range of brand positioning, portfolio strategy, and product and service innovation projects across food, drink, healthcare, and technology, while still looking under 40, which is incredible. Mark is also our head of offer, which means he's responsible for renovating, innovating, and championing Clear's approach to strategy, ensuring we have a joined up, consistent, and differentiated offer that enables us to unlock our future growth ambitions. And I'm going to hand over to our friend Emma from TML Partners to introduce our partnership.
Thanks, Geraint. From TML Partners, I'd just love to wish a warm welcome this afternoon to everybody joining us. I believe we've got over 400 marketing leaders joining us today, which is fantastic to see. A huge thank you to our panelists, Valerie, Anna, Steve, and Michael, for agreeing to take part this afternoon in sharing your thoughts and insights. I know we're in for a terrific session. For those of you who are not familiar with TML Partners, we're an executive search firm who specialise in senior and board level appointments across marketing and communications. I'm a senior consultant within the team, and my focus is on FMCG and retail. So from our side, we found it really encouraging in the last few months that clients are continuing to invest in business critical hires, which really illustrates, I think, the importance of marketing and communications as true drivers of growth, even in these challenging times. And it's great to be here this afternoon discussing the role that marketing leaders have in making some key and perhaps some tricky decisions coming into 2021. So we're really pleased to be partnering with Clear M&C Saatchi. I believe this is the fourth session we've shared. Earlier on this year, prior to lockdown, we ran a couple more intimate face-to-face CMO roundtable events, and more recently a webinar which focused on marketing leaders in the B2B sector. So it's great to be connecting again sort of here today. And now I'm going to pass back over to Mark, who's going to set the scene for our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Emma. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, and I just want to share our perspective on some of the challenges and opportunities as we look forward to 2021, before I then hand over to our panel to discuss. So today's conversation is all about how consumer goods firms can really pivot to growth as we look beyond the impact of COVID. And particularly, it's about the role that marketing leaders and the function as a whole can really play in driving and charting this path forward. So the first thing to discuss is, what do you do when everything has changed and then in other ways, actually nothing has changed? And there's a lot of pressure on businesses to, in fact, change everything. But the reality is that most businesses are really struggling to understand what has actually changed. How have consumers' needs, behaviours, attitudes really been impacted by COVID? And how will they continue to evolve over the next few years? And these are big questions which 6-7 months in really still remain unanswered for most businesses. But due to the pace of change, there really is a lack of the usual evidence and data that we normally rely on to answer these big questions. And the pressure to accelerate plans is greater than ever. There's an expectation for many marketing leaders to be changing the tyres while still driving the car. And that's putting everybody within the functions under a lot of pressure. But we believe there is still a big opportunity to drive growth. Marketing plays a key role within that. And that we believe if you take a step back to decide and be clear on what you have to change, then there is real big opportunities ahead. So we want to share some of those opportunities for 2021 and the things that we think are worth changing. Before I do that, I also wanted to share a kind of perspective on the role of marketing to navigate this change. So in a world where uncertainty is the only guarantee, we believe it's marketing and leaders within that function role to inspire direction, growth, and confidence in their organizations. To take that strategic lead in reshaping the business and positively building for the future. To provide direction, helping the organizations make choices and back a consistent strategy that can align different functions around your brand's purpose and promise to your consumers and the category. To deliver growth, So positive changes and positive choices that bring additional or replacement revenue streams that make up for potential losses that you may be suffering from. And importantly, to create confidence, to kind of unite the wider business, to give colleagues what they need to deliver those evolved offers and experiences, and align stakeholders behind a shared vision for your brands. If this is the role of marketing, then what we also wanted to discuss is that some of the opportunities that marketing can drive forward, and in particular, 3 of them that we wanted to share with you today. So the first is around how to manage your portfolio through this change, and really how to optimize your portfolio for long-term growth. And there is a lot of debate and a lot of conflicting thoughts on what is the right approach during an economic downturn, whether you should rationalize and focus on fewer smaller bets, or whether you need to diversify and invest in new areas of growth. And we really believe that actually it's a balance of both, which is probably most right for most organizations. But to really keep analyzing and understand the dynamics of the category, making decisions based on insight and data to make sure that you optimize your portfolio for both different types of opportunities that exist within your categories. An example of somebody that's doing this recently, I think, is Coca-Cola, which announced in July intention to cut the zombie brands from its portfolio. And they revealed that of the 400 brands that they have in their portfolio, only half of them contribute to just 2% of their revenue stream. So they've got a huge number of brands which actually are adding more complexity than value to their business. And their CEO, James Quincy, has been quoted as saying, we need to do a better job of nurturing and growing smaller and more enduring propositions rather than those existing zombie brands. And Zico is one of the latest ones that's just been culled from their portfolio. Very much linked to that is the need to have a vision for the future of your category. We know that every category is being disrupted and that most, if not all, retailers are really looking at all of their categories with fresh eyes. And they're under pressure to rationalize and optimize their portfolios as well. Across the UK's top 6 retailers, there's been 9% reduction in SKUs over the past 6 months. So that's 13,000 fewer product lines in the UK consumer goods market than just 6 months ago. And the trade needs confidence on the role of your category and brand in adding value to their customers and driving long-term growth of their business. That's particularly true as both brands and retailers are competing across more channels than ever before, and channels with completely different dynamics to what they may be used to. So there is a need for that joined up, holistic view of the future of the category and the future of the consumer purchase experience. Just like before, retailers also really need a vision that provides them with direction, growth, and confidence as well. The next opportunity, we think, is really around making the most of this growth in the online retail channels. And as they show the significant growth, in-home becomes even more important than ever before. We think that, well, we've seen that many brands don't always consider the sensory aspect of the in-home experience, and they're missing out on a huge opportunity to surprise and delight their customers at a critical moment of engagement. And there's a really big upside in considering this in-home experience more strategically. A recent study showed that 24% of consumers say they're more likely to make a repeat purchase if they receive a branded or gift-like packaging from an online retailer. And through packaging innovation, there is really an opportunity to leverage those different sensory elements, sound, scent, tactile tools, in order to increase engagement and deliver a compelling brand experience at a real moment that matters. So an example of this was seen by SC Johnson, who own Glade, and in partnership with Walmart, they filled the typical packaging pillows that you receive in your brown delivery boxes with Glade scent. And that led to an 83% increase in sales on Walmart during its first week. So that sensory innovation can have a huge impact on sales. And Finally, I'd just like to add is that at the moment, in this ever-evolving landscape with a constant flow of new potential opportunities and bets to be made, it can be hard to understand which are the right opportunities to back. And this is where having that clear strategy is key. To be able to have that overarching purpose and vision for the brand really helps to evaluate the opportunities and to move quickly on those that will help you deliver your purpose. And I think a great example of this is Dettol here in the UK, which moved really quickly to form a partnership with Transport for London to provide the hand sanitizers across the London Underground. And that adds value back to their consumers, it adds value back to TfL, and it adds a huge amount of value back to their brand as well. So that's all that I wanted to share in terms of our perspective and some of the opportunities for 2021 and beyond. But now I'd like to hand back to Geraint and back to our panel.
Right, thank you very much, Mark. I thought it was very interesting and a really good way to set up the coming conversation. So we're going to kick off some questions for our panelists. I should say we've been inundated with questions from the audience in advance. We will try and answer as many of those as we can in the discussion. But if you do have a really burning question that we don't cover, please try and ask it in that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I will try and make time for it if I can. So if I can ask all of the panel to come off mute, just very quickly. Thank you very much. I think the first question for me is this sort of broad question really around thinking about 2021 ultimately, which is where should food, drink and consumer goods marketers be focusing their efforts in the short, the medium and the longer term? Is it still about that short-term tactical stuff, or are we now starting to think more strategically about the future? So I'm going to come to you first, Anna, if that's okay. What do you think is the place that you should be focusing your effort in the short, medium and long term?
Thank you, Geraint. You know, there's so much to focus on, but I think number one, an even more relentless focus on understanding our consumers. In the food and drink space, we've all seen a significant increase in cooking and baking at home. And it's really critical to understand what aspects of those trends will stick, as well as understanding any new and amplified consumer trends that will become very relevant. I know for McCormick, it's really unpredictable to think about what's going to hold through the year and where do we need to pivot. But I think keeping the consumer at the heart of everything you do will definitely steer us in the right direction. And we can do that through looking at our existing businesses, innovation, communication, and messaging. I think also it's about focusing on understanding your categories and how it's changing, or how you can grow faster than your categories. In the end, when you win market share, this translates into business growth. So again, keeping the consumer at the heart of everything you do will in the end steer us in the right direction. We'll create more intimate, personalized, one-to-one relationships. And I think this will be really critical as we move into the future. For most of us, we don't have an unlimited amount of money to spend, and really understanding how each dollar you spend translates to growth or brand love will become really critical as we move into 2021. And on a related point,
Go on.
No, I think just on a related point, that just means data and analytics and insights become even more important. Unlock those opportunities and be as predictive as possible so you can be where the growth is at.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about getting close to the trends and the scenarios that are likely to come over the hill. I think that's a big challenge for all of us, and it's a challenge we're often hearing back from our clients. Steve, let me come to you next. What does this mean for Plardis? What's 2021 planning looking like for you?
Well, thanks, Geraint. I think the question of where you focus short, medium, long term, it's almost a false question, because as commercial marketeers, we have to cover all three in equal measure. We've all got to keep our eye on the numbers this year. It's been a crazy year, and that craziness won't go away. But delivering the numbers at the end of this financial is critical, certainly for me and for my business. But during this whole crisis and pandemic, we've also been going through a back to basics and square one strat plan that sets out our priorities for the next 3 years. So we've been managing both the immediacy of COVID and also our long-term strategic plan. So it's been an interesting 8 months for I think all of us in the business. I think Anna's absolutely right. We have to stay close to the consumer and checking in to really understand if the fundamental trends we're seeing in the category will be fundamentally disrupted. Now, COVID, and none of us have got a crystal ball, none of us knows what's going to happen, but at the moment, COVID is the biggest challenge our generation has faced in society and in business and marketing. It's a huge kind of black, horrible spike, which has disrupted everything. But we may still find that long-term trends are disrupted but not changed. And so, you know, my expectation, but we have to check in with consumers all the time, is the long-term trends we're seeing, for instance, towards polarization of the food category into healthier, into premium, into more indulgence, in terms of the, again, multiple grocery versus discounters, again, premiumization versus value. Those trends are likely to continue, but let's stay close to consumer and make sure we're quite tight on that. But in terms of our strat plan, the strat planning assumptions are informed by COVID, but not driven by them, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's very true of many of our conversations. I could see Valerie nodding vigorously as she was listening to you talking about the fact that these longer term trends are going to remain hugely influential on our future planning. Valerie, do you want to jump in and talk about your own 2021 plans?
Sure. Working on the consumer side, I definitely feel like, just like I think it was Steve who said, that the long-term trends are still there, and they're still there in full force. How we express them, how we execute against them might change just a little bit, but things like well-being and things like, you know, premium indulgence, that's going to be very important. Also, not just well-being from a nutrition standpoint and a health standpoint, but also sustainability is going to continue to be really important as we think about the impact on our planet. I know that previous to COVID, there had been several strategies put out in terms of sustainability with packaging and responsibility for snacking made right at our company. And those are still very much in place, making sure we're transparent about nutritional labeling, you know, making a commitment to portion control, and recyclability. I think one of the things that is in some of our favors as big CPGs is the change in consumer shifts to more trust for bigger brands. I think that's been one of the shifts that's really benefited a lot of big CPG companies, because previous to this, there had been more and more, you know, just looking at smaller startup brands and whatnot. I think that's still going to be there, but there was a little bit of a pendulum shift to being able to trust our bigger brands a little bit more. And that's one of the things that, you know, we can capitalize on by continuing to make sure we're reaching consumers where they are now, thinking about apertures, and making sure, like we said before, being really close to our consumers and making sure we're understanding their new behaviors and their new attitudes, because that's going to help us make sure we reach them in the right places and the relevancy. So while, you know, short-term and long-term are both very important, I think long-term, we keep on the trends, we keep thinking about it, but in short-term, we keep making sure we're watching how the attitudes and behaviors change, especially around e-commerce. How are they buying different pack sizes? You know, where are they buying their different, you know, impulse products now? How do we make sure we're watching what they're doing so that we can continue to deliver in the right place at the right time?
I think it's a really lovely way of putting it. I think what's been interesting to me is that our behaviors have changed overnight, which typically takes an extremely long time. And now we're in a position where it's sort of on its head. Behaviors have changed, attitudes are shifting more slowly. The question is the extent to which some of those behaviors are going to stick around, and how can we strategically plan against that? How's that affecting your business, Michael? What are you looking at for 2021?
I think the previous speakers have covered a lot of the points already. So in that, we do have to keep an eye out on the long term, because some of the fundamental trends just are not changing, and that's something that we have to keep planning for. And this environment that's coming up actually represents a terrific opportunity for growth for quite a few different categories. So I'm dealing mainly in personal care and healthcare. A lot of those trends will continue, move towards naturality, looking for safer, more environmentally choices. And these will always be there. I think, as Valerie's just mentioned, it's how we express that and how we deal with that, going forward, which will apply. Really, the big challenge for next year is how can you deliver in the upcoming, economic environment. So everyone's talking about COVID. We should stop talking about COVID. We should talk about recession. We're going into a recession where people's purchase behaviors are going to change. And how are we going to address those purchase behaviors? And how do we win in a tougher retail environment, during that? So people are going to be looking for value. They will be shopping around more. That has real implication really for our channel strategies. And that's something that we're looking very, very closely at. And when we're looking in terms of what our consumers are looking for, they're making big choices between discretionary and sort of essential purchases. Where does your product or where do your brands lie? And obviously, discretionary purchases will become fewer and further between, in a cash-strapped household. And so then we have to start thinking really quite tactically. How are we going to be starting, hitting key price points? How do we deliver value through different product formats, for example, and sizes? And how do we make some of our more expensive products more affordable to our consumers? And a very interesting point about big brands being more trusted. If you are going to spend your money, you want to spend it in a brand that you trust. And so that dependability, ensuring that you are bolstering trust amongst your user base, or for those people who are switching, they want to ensure they're buying the right one with the money that they have. So that really is an important piece, and ensuring that we're going to be driving need for those things that they might not be thinking about. So there's really actually quite a lot of tactical activity that has to happen next year. We're going to have to pivot quite a lot of the messaging and the way that we communicate, some of the activities that we're doing. But yes, we mustn't lose sight of the longer term.
Sounds like it's going to be a busy year for everybody. I'm going to come to you next, Emma, because in a busy year, it often means you've got more need for good quality people. And yet we're all operating under constraints. We've seen the figures, 40,000 marketers made redundant in the last, or who've lost their jobs in the last few months, and 70,000, I think, around the world in some form of furlough. How do you plan for a 2021 that sounds incredibly busy and full of really challenging, quite interesting, both tactical and strategic needs in a world with fewer resources?
So I was kind of thinking, so just listening to everything the panelists say is very much reflected in terms of what I speak to people about on a day-to-day basis. Everybody's thinking about the same thoughts and trying to tackle the same problems. I think sort of coming at it from a recruitment angle in the short term, I think it's really important for marketing leaders to be coaching your teams to be resilient and agile. I think you need to be having lots of discussions around expecting plans to change and to plan for the changes. And perhaps there's been a lot of discussion with people I've been talking to and what I hear today around about, perhaps needing to do more of a test and learn approach to campaign planning next year. And then also, as consumer sort of habits and behaviors are changing all the time at the moment, and with all the kind of various regional sort of lockdowns and things, I think teams are going to have to work quicker and smarter, perhaps a bit more like the startups and the scale up sort of companies in terms of ways of working. I think in the midterm, I think there's going to be a need for people to be making sure they've got the right sort of skills in place in their teams. So I think it's going to be a greater emphasis, more so than ever before, in terms of performance marketing, more expertise in affiliate marketing, paid social, for example. And I think Anna or Valerie, you touched on this, getting closer to your consumer, and people are having very different experiences across the country, and indeed countries sort of globally. So having a really strong insights function, whether that's data analysts who are measuring sort of campaign performance, or I guess more sort of qualitative kind of insights really into really understanding not just just how consumers are actually feeling, but their behaviours. And then finally, I was thinking more about, and again, Valerie, I think you were touching on this as well. I guess in terms of sort of employee attraction and sort of retention sort of issues, touching on what you were actually saying about, I think more than ever, not just consumers, but prospective employees and employees within businesses are really wanting to kind of work within businesses with a really values-led approach. So, you know, lots of the conversations I'm having with people looking for new roles or perhaps wanting to stay put is all around ethics and trust and kindness more than ever before at the moment.
I think that's a lovely way to sort of wrap up the challenge around how do you help the marketing community at large to deliver the huge challenges that we're about to face as we head into the next year. The panel so beautifully put together. Mark, I'm going to come to you next. The question, I guess, really now is, you know, you and I every day we see the differing briefs that come across the desk at Clear, and luckily for us, we've had a good number of them this year, and many of them have been in this sort of slightly schizophrenic place between needing to focus on the really short term, but also needing to look to scenario plan for a future we don't really know anything about. Do you see a more of a trend towards thinking about 21 in the last few weeks and months?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's 21, and as the panel alluded to, and beyond as well. I mean, the things that, you know, businesses do over the next 6 months are going to impact their performance over the next 6 years as well. So I think people are trying to shift out of kind of firefighting and thinking more to that long-term growth of their brands and categories. I think the thing which unites those kind of short-term and long-term challenges, I think Anna and Emma both mentioned it, is the importance of evidence-based decision-making, and actually whether that's from consumer insight or market data, but making sure that we are making choices and evaluations based on evidence, data and insight, rather than just gut feel. Although there is an element of that, but evidence needs to be there to help unite the business behind these different difficult decisions.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely way to jump onto the next question, really, which is, I'm going to come to you, Valerie, on this because you've nodded so furiously about these long-term trends. So I have a real interest in whether you think we're seeing entirely unexpected behaviours and needs, or whether actually 2020 simply accelerated the trends that already existed whilst perhaps sidelining others.
Quite honestly, I think for the most part, they accelerated quite a few of them. If we look at e-commerce and the way people were starting to shop, it was going towards e-commerce and channels. We were trying to be creative, and many of the companies I've seen with e-commerce of how do you actually design experiences that deliver, similar to the Walmart example that you gave. Now it's going to become more and more important to be experiential. Also to think about how, you know, in the past we've thought about the shopper at the shelf set. How do we actually think about the shopper at the user interface of our different e-commerce channels? But that again is something that's been more accelerated, and we've seen a lot of growth there, and different companies have had different executions across it. Again, I think well-being is going to continue to be important. How we go about it is really, you know, really up to, again, the channels and the transparency. You know, finally, I really liked what said about, you know, this idea of value. Again, I think that was a trend that was coming. People were starting to think about where they're putting their dollars more and making sure they're getting the most out of the new products and the trials that they get of new products, or even get the most from the products that they know and trust, and making sure we deliver that all the time. So quality, making sure you're actually designing against a job to be done. Thinking about that and making the product relevant and meaningful to really deliver that value, and making sure you're truly thinking about a holistic design. I think, again, the Walmart example is a great example of that holistic thinking that drove trial. We've seen, you know, where people have been trying brands they've never tried before, and how do we capitalize on some of those trials because they're shopping just a little bit differently for having more in the home.
Michael, I'm going to come to you next, if I may. I was really interested in your perspective on the sort of the enormous challenges that are coming in 21, and also your perspective on the behaviours that are driving that and the trends that are driving that. Are you in the same place as Valerie? Do you think that there's a huge number of trends that have simply been accelerated by the crisis, or are you in a different place?
In a similar place. So if we split out in terms of changes in purchasing behavior and changes in consumer need, starting with purchasing behavior, there have been a lot of changes, and that's really driving our thinking around channel strategy. So, obviously online is really, really important, but what is also important is the way that people have changed their shopping patterns. And so convenience stores now and top-up shopping is something that has happened a great deal. Our categories in terms of our personal care categories, we're seeing people buying more of that through their weekly shop as opposed to popping into Boots on the way home, for example. So we are seeing quite a few changes in the way that our consumers are looking for and buying our products. In terms of the consumer needs, we sell Arm & Hammer toothpaste. Fundamental needs for toothpaste haven't changed. That will always be there, for example. However, quite a few usage occasions, of course, have changed in the light of the COVID environment. And some of those usage occasions are going to stay because of people changing the way that they work. So there is less travel, more people are at home. We sell Nair depilatories, for example. So during lockdown, the ability to continue your beauty regime at home was really important. And we really pushed that hard through the comms that we had. But also some subtle changes around consumer need states. So if we start thinking about what the need states are in the different categories, for example, being able to look presentable on the go. Well, if you're not on the go so much, then that need state is going to be less important. And so we see that we sell Batiste dry shampoo. We can see that the way consumers are using the dry shampoo are for different reasons. And so having fully understanding that, getting behind those and encouraging new usage occasions is going to be important going forward.
I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. I'm going to come to you next, Anna, to talk about the same thing, really, which is in your category. I mean, behavior changed overnight, really. We all had to cook at home. I mean, I like cooking, but I think quite a lot of people found that terrifying. But for somebody at McCormick, that must have been both a wonderful thing to get involved with, but also quite intimidating, right?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I agree with what Valerie and Michael said. I think one of the changes we saw that was more of a bit of an evolution as well as an acceleration is this idea of the home and what it stands for and what it represents. In many ways, it elevated its importance, and it's become the central hub for so much more between the blurred lines of home, work, school, gym, etc. And cooking classes. We had a cooking event, but we did it remotely. So the amount of cooking and baking at home, the amount of searches we saw that said, what do I do with all this extra flour? What do I do with the pasta? What do I do with, really ripe bananas? It's like, we had to be there and present with recipes that says, here's what you do with banana bread. Here's what you do with your kids. Fun things to do baking at home with kids. So we really had to pivot to be relevant, given this new dynamic of what it meant to be at home, what it meant to be at home with your kids, or home alone, and what did that mean to give you inspiration. So I think there was an element of that was not just an acceleration, but a bit of an evolution. And probably another area that evolved, accelerated, but also changed a bit is this idea of flexible working and what you were able to achieve. So for it depends which function you're in, though. Obviously we had people who were working in the plants and working that had to keep the shelves stocked, and what did that mean from a leadership standpoint, and how do you lead through that as well. But definitely this whole cooking and baking at home was a really accelerated experience for us at McCormick, something we needed to lean into in order to give people inspiration and ideas, as well as comfort. And Valerie, you mentioned this about the health and wellness aspect. Definitely there was that, people looking for turmeric ideas and what to do with, other healthy ingredients, but they were also looking for indulgence as well. So we saw the swing on both sides. So those would probably be a couple of the examples I would give on ways that things accelerated, but also evolved.
So let's talk about how that's impacted portfolio decisions and whether you should, to Mark's point earlier in his little presentation, whether you should diversify or rationalize. Steve, I think Mark talked beautifully about diversification and rationalization, but in a category primarily dominated in your business by biscuits, what is it that you do in this context? Because I mean, I've eaten a lot of biscuits over lockdown. I can tell you that for an absolute fact. I think there's quite a lot of people on this call who will say the same. What do you do? Do you diversify? Do you think, well, actually, this is a huge opportunity for the business to do some interesting things, to challenge new formats, to do some testing, perhaps live in an interesting environment? Or do you think, well, actually, it's also an opportunity to think carefully about which parts of our portfolio really do perform?
Well, I think during this COVID crisis, and to Mark's point, Michael's point, the recession that's now going to follow, we have to think very carefully about our portfolio in the short term versus the long term. So in terms of the impacts on COVID, some trends have accelerated, like indulgence and premiumization, and some trends have decelerated. Healthier has fallen through the floor. Clearly on the go has fallen through the floor. People are snacking more at home, and even sharing bags have gone up quite a lot. So, we have to figure out for next year, where do you place our bets? So for H2 this year, it's quite straightforward. Indulgence and premiumization is a trend, and therefore we've launched into markets. We pulled forward our plans. We've launched McVitie's VIBs, very important biscuits. You should go out and try them. Wonderfully indulgent flavors and caramel texture, at a nice price point as well. And
good add in the middle.
Christmas snacks. We launched, again, very bold flavors, some treatier flavors as well, with our classic mini cheddars brand, which is really growing very fast with things like new flavors and Mexican flavors. So we've got behind the indulgence trend because it's now and current. The healthier trend provokes a question. COVID has put paid to healthier eating. Is that a short-term or long-term trend? And we think that's a short-term blip. And we think people having indulged at home for the last 6 to 8 months will come out in January and regain that newfound interest in getting on your bike and getting down the gym and health. So we haven't paused in any way our development of healthier options. We may just put back the launches into January onwards next year. So those are the kind of immediate tensions and decisions about managing your portfolio.
Yeah.
And just to pick up on something that Michael and I are talking to, COVID has also given an opportunity for big brands, big mainstream brands, to regain that trust. Because one of the trends has been the absence of trust in big mainstream brands that became too corporate and too soulless. And authentic specialist brands with more authenticity and more passion and soul have done very, very well. Now, people are buying into bigger mainstream brands, not because they're suddenly falling in love with them again, because they're a safe bet for the whole family, and they're what's been on shelf. But I think it's a great opportunity for the big players to regain that trust, reinvest in emotional benefits. And to Michael's point, discounters and value is becoming more important. So making sure that you're investing product quality and not taking consumers for granted, as many brands frankly have for the last few years, I think is also really important. So 2021, continuing indulgence, a re-emergence of health, but also a chance to reassert that brand love that we all want consumers to feel for mainstream brands once more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've had a question on LinkedIn actually about this sort of idea of kind of wealth or indulgence versus health. Which should we focus on as marketers as we head into 21? And I think there is that tension. I mean, you're absolutely right. Indulgence has come back in a big way, but at the same time, we've seen, and I know HelloFresh are joining us today, for example. We've seen HelloFresh, we've seen Gusto, we've seen all of these meal kits going through the roof. People just buying them to help themselves to cook at home, and they happen to be accidentally most of the time pretty healthy. You have to go quite deep into the Gusto menu, I've found, to find something really unhealthy, which is quite disappointing.
I'm not sure if it's a tension or it's a polarization. I think this trend has been present for some time. It actually puts a lot of pressure on, let's say, mainstream brands that sit in the middle. These mainstream brands are being kind of chipped away at by wonderful challenger brands with great personality, and brands which outflank them on being either healthier or more indulgent. So I don't see that as a tension. I see the tension as being on the mainstream middle and how that mainstream middle is going to react to those challenges on either side.
I can see Valerie nodding. Valerie, what's your perspective on portfolio and the changes that you might want to make to it coming into 2021?
Well, I think, it's been talked about, with us that there's going to be some more simplification in our portfolio. And I think that is going to actually enable quite a bit of benefits to actually then give more pointed benefits. I think Steve mentioned, thinking about the benefits and the features of the product. It's going to actually enable us to simplify our innovation a little bit more with some focus. It's going to enable us to simplify, our supply chain. One of the things that we noticed through COVID is the different challenges for supply chain and the factories. And keeping the shelves stocked, as Anna said. So this will also, enable making sure you've got the right supply chain in place. And it also is going to, help us meet our demand on core products. So, I think that the simplification is actually going to enable us to do better diversification, if that makes sense, and thinking about those long-term trends and the emotional benefits that Steve was mentioning, because those are going to become more and more important, whether it's the short-term on indulgence or the longer-term on well-being.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think actually, Michael, you sort of touched on this a bit when you were talking earlier about your portfolio of brands, because they're quite different. And I think we talked on Monday about this idea of an unfair year where certain brands have done brilliantly, Dettol, and other brands have not done so well. And there's been an assumption that everyone in CPG has done brilliantly, but the reality is that's not true. If you've got a brand that's in sort of a place like Batiste, it's a very different challenge than if you've got a brand in a place like Arm & Hammer. So can I ask you a little bit about how you're managing that? Are you turning up investment in certain brands and moving investment down in others, but keeping a base level? What are you doing in terms of your investment strategies across those brands?
Yeah, so the investment strategies, this is about prioritization, in the environment. So going back to rationalization, rationalization is largely driven by the bottom line and less by consumer trends. So can you support, for example, failing channels, or can you support low margin brands if you're being squeezed in other areas? We look at it more from a prioritization point of view. Diversification is something that we also look at because we want to be able to better differentiate what we do in the various channels so that we can maintain the price points, maintain margins. But really it is around, okay, so what are the brands that are thriving well in this environment? And we can see those that are offering really good at-home solutions are doing very well for us. So we have increased investment around that. But also those brands where we see the opportunity in this new environment, where perhaps we have to get our consumers to think slightly differently, create that demand in this new environment, in that new need state. So we have also been investing behind those brands where we think we can see actually the way that people are going to be working, living, buying. Our current brand can address that opportunity very well. So we're going to invest behind that, invest behind the comms and the NPD to deliver against it.
I think it's a really good way of viewing it, and I'm gonna move it on a little bit, Anna, to think about this idea of looking to a future where you're less constrained by some of the limitations that are being placed on us right now by both reduced budgets and other bits and pieces. How hard is it to look to the long-term future and isolate some of the here-to-stay behaviors from the sort of the transient sort of COVID-only behaviors? Is it even possible yet for a brand like McCormick to unpick that?
I think in many ways, our core strategies remain the same. There's maybe a pulsing into one area a bit more than others, but to be honest, when you talk about simplification, we've been driving a removing of complexity that is not consumer driven. So, that should stay with you no matter what. And if anything, COVID has just sort of forced people to people like us to say, okay, do we really need that 100th recipe mix? I'm not sure, but we do need to make sure we always have the best options out there. So we're focused on our core. We've accelerated innovation, but then there's other areas where there's a level of complexity within the business that it could impact supply chain. And if it's not consumer driven, you get it out. And that should just be good best practice in terms of running a business. And then, as we look forward, it's like I said earlier, it's all about keeping the consumer at the heart of everything you do, staying close to them, coming up with new insights and techniques in order to speak to your consumers more quickly and get insights so that where you need to pivot, you do. I do think gone are the days where you can do, launch a campaign, then do post-campaign analysis, see how it goes, or launch an MPD and then let it just linger. There's ways to optimize as you go, learn as you go, and be on the journey with your consumer so you can be as relevant as possible. So that's kind of the big, in a big strategic way, how we're driving it forward.
Yeah, I think it's part of the decision as to why we acquired about 18 months, 2 years ago now, a business in Germany that focuses on agile transformation and is currently doing some fantastic agile transformation for Nestle, who are, I think, on the call at the moment. So it's an illustration of the way in which behaviors have shifted, even in big traditional businesses that have had very traditional innovation processes. It's had to change things to make things faster, but also to make it more easy to parallel process different risky assumptions that you're testing in market, and then being really brutal about saying, this one isn't going to reach our hurdle rate. We've got to get rid of it. One of my clients said to me a couple of weeks ago, this is the stop it and tidy up moment for our industry, which I love, being a connoisseur of 1980s cartoons. Stop it and tidy up were two of my favorite characters. If you want to go and look them up on YouTube, it's fantastic. But it is that moment of being able to say, let's stop what we're doing. Think about all of the mess we've made over the last however many years, where we've just not been confident enough or brutal and ruthless enough with our P&L to go, actually, this isn't doing the job it needs to do. We could be spending that money better elsewhere in our portfolio. And I think it's a really interesting time for brands in this space. I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes, and it feels horrendous just spending 2 or 3 minutes on this topic, but I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes on this idea of getting into people's homes, that direct to customer or the digital and delivery channel, and understanding how you guys are thinking about investment in packaging and delivery. I'm going to come to you first on this, Steve. Is this a way to become more distinctive and, dare I say it, if it's possible, differentiated in 2021? Is it about saying, right, we know this is going to be a big channel for now and forever, and it's going to be a more important channel, an increasingly more important channel. Therefore, we've got to invest more in the way our packaging shows up in home and how our delivery partners treat our brands.
I think you're right. I think before we get to D2C specific issues in terms of packaging and shoving in people's homes, it's most important that actually the brands themselves live up to people's needs today. And I talked earlier about, corporate soulless brands. It's so important that brands have more heart and soul than mark of the maker, more craft credentials, more provenance, more authenticity. And that drives both a greater engagement and loyalty with consumers, but also worth paying more for credentials, which is really critical given the rise of discounters and the pressures we're going to see with the recession that's going to come. In terms of D2C space, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and we're seeing a lot of brands use it very well for entering a market. For be it Grays or Harry's, it's a great way for brands to get a foothold in people's homes that didn't have that traditional route to market. Those brands are now moving beyond D2C and getting into traditional channels as well. So I think it's D2C, and pure D2C is very interesting if it's a premium brand, a brand that can offer, for instance, personalization in people's homes, a brand which is a high interest brand, a brand which is actually logistically feasible to ship at a profit. So razor blades are brilliant, but loaves of bread, less so. And where there's that high degree of consumer interest, and consumers will probably have no more than 2 or 3 brands which they select to have an engagement with in pure D2C. So I think the mainstream food brands, for instance, that space is less interesting than it would be for brands which are more premium or in the health and personal care space.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, you're in personal care. Is it something that you're focused on? Are you thinking, you know, actually, we've got to make a proper investment in this, because if not, and I do apologize, I'm going to throw in one of our other pieces of IP, the experience gap here. Are you at risk of creating a gap between customer expectation and perception of brand and the reality of a package being thrown over the wall?
Yeah, so we are investing in D2C. We're putting a new platform in place as we speak and should be going live, or hopefully today, if they can get the bugs out. And that is something that we'll continue to invest in going forward. And, you know, we're looking at the right way to get more brands onto the platform in terms of the range, the offers, and as you said, in terms of the experience that we deliver our customers. I think it's important that, you know, not all brands, not all products require a big unboxing event. However, it is a real opportunity to ensure that you can ultimately get happy and loyal customers. How can you positively reinforce their choice and address any concerns or any dissonance that they had in terms of purchasing it? You know, satisfy them that they've got, you know, the product that's going to meet their benefits. And it's really important then also to ensure that you are helping your consumers get the most out of the product as well. So that's not necessarily about the box that it arrives in, but what goes with it. And that's an important part of ensuring that, you know, for example, we have a very premium food supplement that is for healthy hair and, you know, against hair loss. And that's really important that, you know, consumers understand, you know, what they bought and how they should be taking it and how often they should be taking it. So we're using what we put in the packaging to ensure that consumers, you know, do comply and get a better result and therefore become more loyal consumers. So that is an important part then of that overall brand experience.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. It's viewing it as a holistic experience rather than just thinking about the package in home. Valerie, when thinking about the holistic experience, I mean, how has that changed your approach to product development? How has it changed your approach to finding out about consumer attitudes as you go through the development process?
Well, I think it starts with understanding their behaviors. Both, I think Emma talked about it earlier, you know, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and making sure that you're using all of your evidence that we've talked about appropriately, especially at the front end, understanding what consumers are actually doing, and then trying to understand why and what their motivations are. You know, once you start to understand what they're doing currently and why, then you can start to really then design products that will satisfy their needs. And thinking about the, jobs to be done theory, which has been, you know, very useful, you know, that's when you can actually say, what's our point of difference versus, you know, what they're doing currently, and how do we deliver value again? And that's where you're going to get the sticking point. You know, I think that was true before this in terms of holistic design. I think now we just need to think about the shopper somewhat differently. We need to think about what are those needs somewhat differently. And again, it's just, you know, the same principles, but maybe expressed in different ways.
Thank you. I think it's been a fantastic and very interesting discussion. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm just going to come to Mark now and give him the horrible hospital pass of summarising everything we've learned. Mark, can you give us just a couple of thoughts, maybe 3 points about what you think we found out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a kind of recurring theme of this need for balance as well, and this balance between both kind of the short and long term, the tactical, and the strategic decisions, and the fact that actually it's not either or, it's a case of having to balance the two. I think there was a consistent theme around this kind of evidence-based, consumer-led, data-led decision making and the importance of that. And this discussion around polarization, whether that was kind of in the health and indulgence space, and that there is opportunities at both ends of the spectrum, and the importance of having a brand portfolio or a business portfolio that can play to both of those opportunities.
Thank you. That's a lovely, and as you said beforehand, very concise and simple summary, which is exactly what we want from a brand like Clear. I'm going to come to you now, Emma, just to join me in saying thank you to the panelists. Oh, you're on mute. It had to happen to somebody. Oh.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to say thank you again, just to all our fabulous panelists this afternoon. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I'm sure everybody's sort of tuning in to listen to you this afternoon. It's given people a lot of, excusing the pun, food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you from Clear and from TML. And thank you to our fantastic audience as well for joining us on all of the different channels. We did successfully get up live on LinkedIn and on YouTube today. So I will make sure that the recordings come around to all of you who've been here today, and I'll share all of that with you in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much to everybody. To Valerie, thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Michael, and thank you to Mark and Emma as well. And thank you for joining Clear Conversations today. See you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.